All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. Well, a little bit past it, but let's not quibble. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, and find out what Don Quixote and Sancho are up to tonight. Welcome back. Tonight is our 7th night of reading from Cervantes' Don Quixote. And I need to make a quick update here. I was rather in a rush this evening. I was too busy mixing a drink to bother updating the drink label. First world problems. But before we really dive into it, I do request a very brief, oh so terribly brief, moment of silence. As soon as I can find my hotkey for this BGM. Okay, moment over. I'm out of tonic. This is the last of the tonic for tonight's gin. I'll recover, but it's just not going to be the same. Alright, so, as we were saying, welcome back. We've had some ins and outs lately. Right, now, if it was the gin being out, it would have taken a little bit more than the few seconds. But for tonic, just a brief, respectful moment is all that is really required, right? To make the blow a little bit easier, it was very flat tonic. It has been around for a little while, but flat tonic is better than no tonic, and no tonic is what we have. Tearing up a little. So, we've had a little bit of some ups and downs lately. I was out a fair bit of last week. The head cold has mostly passed us on. At this point, I just have a little bit of a lingering tickle in the throat and a cough that will assuredly make itself known. But, meh, we're none the worse for wear. So, we'll chin up and carry on. And as a reminder, before we get too in-depth and really get our started for tonight, on Saturday, we're making a few changes. First, we'll be starting at 6. And we'll be running for the full 4 hours, and so we'll still plan on ending at 10 on Saturday. And we'll be starting to read a new, unarchived book. Well, new to us. Well, most assuredly not new to us, but remember what I said about quibbling? Let's not. Anyway, starting on Saturday, we'll be dedicating our Saturdays from here on out to an unarchived series. This time, we're starting off with The Fellowship of the Ring, because if I'm going to start off with a series and make a regular thing of reading things that are more current than we've been reading, you know damn well I'm going to Tolkien. A, it's safe. B, it's the equivalent of a semi-modern classic. If Disney hadn't screwed up the public domain, it would already be in the public domain, but stupid mouse. And then there will also be a surprise that we have in store on Saturday. Yeah, we will be here all night if we let this keep going on. So we will get back to our reading very shortly. But yeah, so in addition to the new series starting on Saturday, I also have a surprise for everyone on Saturday. that will definitely involve more than a fresh bottle of tonic. That's just a bonus to throw in. But this is something that's been in the works since, I'd say, about September or so. And I will be very happy to unveil it. And hopefully we can share in some of the excitement as we come upon it. So, with all that preamble out of the way, I'm excited to find out what sort of nonsense. I'm not terribly obscure about my illusions, so we'll see. Your suspicions may be on the accurate side. We'll see. So I'm intrigued to find out what our plucky protagonist, our unwitting, well, I guess he's actually unwitting, what Don Quixote is up to now. Because, as we may recall, on Sunday night, Sancho left him in the wilderness to his madness. Now, keep in mind, madness and Don Quixote are, with day ending and why. But this time he's alone. And the last time he was alone, things didn't go terribly well. So let's see how things start to shake up. Switch back to our proper reading page. And get back to where we left off, with chapter 27 of Don Quixote, of how the curate and the barber proceeded with their scheme, together with other matters worthy of record in this great history. The curate's plan did not seem a bad one to the barber, but on the contrary so good that they immediately set about putting it in execution. They begged a petticoat and hood of the landlady, leaving her in pledge a new cassock of the curate's, and the barber made a beard out of a gray, brown, or red oxtail, in which the landlord used to stick his comb. The landlady asked them what they wanted these things for, and the curate told her in a few words about the madness of Don Quixote, and how this disguise was intended to get him away from the mountain where he then was. The landlord and landlady immediately came to the conclusion that the madman was their guest, the balsam man and master of the blanketed squire, and they told the curate all that had passed between him and them, not omitting what Sancho had been so silent about. Finally, the landlady dressed up the curate in a style that left nothing to be desired. She put on him a cloth petticoat with black velvet stripes, a palm broad all slashed, and a bodice of green velvet, set off by a binding of white satin, which, as well as the petticoat, must have been made in the time of King Wamba. The curate would not let them hood him, but put on his head a little quilted linen cap, which he used for a nightcap, and bound his forehead with a strip of black silk, while with another he made a mask with which he concealed his beard and face very well. He then put on his hat, which was broad enough to serve him for an umbrella, and, enveloping himself in his cloak, seated himself woman fashion on his mule, while the barber mounted his with a beard down to the waist of mingled red and white, for it was, as has been said, the tail of a clay-red ox. They took leave of all, and of the good Meritones, who, sinner as she was, promised to pray a rosary of prayers that God might grant them success in such an arduous and Christian undertaking as that they had in hand. But hardly had he sallied forth from the inn when it struck the curate that he was doing wrong in rigging himself out in that fashion, as it was an indecorous thing for a priest to dress himself that way, even though much might depend upon it. And saying so to the barber, he begged him to change dresses, as it was fitter he should be the distressed damsel, while he himself would play the squire's part, which would be less derogatory to his dignity, Otherwise he was resolved to have nothing more to do with the matter, and let the devil take Don Quixote. Just at this moment, Sancho came up, and on seeing the pair in such a costume, he was unable to restrain his laughter. The barber, however, agreed to do as the curate wished, and, altering their plan, the curate went on to instruct him how to play his part, and what to say to Don Quixote to induce and compel him to come with them and give up his fancy for the place he had chosen for his idle penance. The barber told him he could manage it properly without any instruction, and as he did not care to dress himself up until they were near where Don Quixote was, he folded up the garments, and the curate adjusted his beard, and they set out, under the guidance of Sancho Panza, who went along telling them of the encounter with the madman they met in the Sierra, saying nothing, however, about the finding of the valise and its contents, for with all his simplicity the lad was a trifle covetous. The next day they reached the place where Sancho had laid the broom branches as marks to direct him where he had left his master, and recognizing it, he told them that here was the entrance, and that they would do well to dress themselves, if that was required to deliver his master, for they had already told him that going in this guise and dressing in this way were of the highest importance in order to rescue his master from the pernicious life he had adopted, and they charged him strictly not to tell his master who they were, or that he knew them, and should he ask, as ask he would if he had given the letter to Dulcinea, to say that he had, and that as she did not know how to read, she had given an answer by word of mouth, saying that she commanded him, on pain of her displeasure, to come and see her at once, and it was a very important matter for himself, because in this way, and with what they meant to say to him, they felt sure of bringing him back to a better mode of life, and inducing him to take immediate steps to become an emperor or monarch, for there was no fear of his becoming an archbishop. All this Sancho listened to and fixed it well in his memory, and thanked them heartily for intending to recommend his master to be an emperor instead of an archbishop, for he felt sure that, in the way of bestowing rewards on their squires, emperors could do more than archbishops errant. He said, too, that it would be as well for him to go on before them, to find him and give him his lady's answer, for that, perhaps, might be enough to bring him away from the place without putting them to all this trouble. They approved of what Sancho proposed, and resolved to wait for him until he brought back word of having found his master. Sancho pushed on into the glens of the Sierra, leaving them in one through which there flowed a little gentle rivulet, and where the rocks and trees afforded a cool and grateful shade. It was an August day, with all the heat of one, and the heat in those parts is intense, and the hour was 3 in the afternoon, all which made the spot the more inviting, and tempted them to wait there for Sancho's return, which they did. They were reposing then, in the shade, when a voice, unaccompanied by the notes of any instrument, but sweet and pleasing in its tone, reached their ears, at which they were not a little astonished, as the place did not seem to them likely quarters for one who sang so well. For though it is often said that shepherds of rare voice are to be found in the woods and fields, this is rather a flight of the poet's fancy than the truth. And still more surprised were they, when they perceived that what they heard sung were the verses not of rustic shepherds, but of the polished wits of the city. And so it proved, for the verses they heard were these: What makes my quest of happiness seem vain? Disdain. What bids me to abandon hope of ease? Jealousies. What holds my heart in anguish of suspense? Absence. If that be so, then for my grief, where shall I turn to seek relief, when hope on every side lays slain by absence, jealousy's disdain? What the prime cause of all my woe doth prove? Love. What at my glory ever asks askance? Chance. Whence is permission to afflict be given? Heaven. If that be so, I but await the stroke of a resistless fate, since working for my woe these three, love, chance, and heaven, in league I see. What must I do to find a remedy? What is the lure for love when coy and strange? change. What, if all fall will cure the heart of sadness? Madness. If that be so, it is but folly to seek a cure for melancholy. Ask where it lies, the answer saith, in change, in madness, or in faith? The summer season, the solitary place, the voice and skill of the singer, all contributed to the wonder and delight of the two listeners, who remained still waiting to hear something more. Finding, however, that the silence continued some little time, they resolved to go in search of the musician, who sang with so fine a voice. But just as they were about to do so, they were checked by the same voice, which once more fell upon their ears, singing this sonnet. I am again impressed by how good the translation is, maintaining the rhyme and mostly meter with translation from Spanish into English is no mean feat. When heavenwards, holy friendship, thou didst go, soaring to seek thy home beyond the sky, and take thy seat among the saints on high, it was thy will to leave on earth below thy semblance, and upon it to bestow thy veil, wherewith at times hypocrisy, parading in thy shape, deceives the eye, and makes its vileness bright as virtue show. Friendship, return to us, or force the cheat that wears it now, thy livery to restore, by aid whereof sincerity is slain. If thou wilt not unmask thy counterfeit, this earth will be the prey of strife once more, as when primeval discord held its reign. The song ended with a deep sigh, and again the listeners remained, waiting attentively for the singer to resume, but perceiving that the music had now turned to sobs and heart-rending moans, they determined to find out who the unhappy being could be, whose voice was as rare as his sighs were piteous. And they had not proceeded far, when on turning the corner of a rock, they discovered a man of the same aspect and appearance as Sancho had described to them when he told them the story of Cardenio. He, showing no astonishment when he saw them, stood still with his head bent down upon his breast like one in deep thought, without raising his eyes to look at them after the first glance, when they suddenly came upon him. The curate, who was aware of his misfortune and recognized him by the description, being a man of good address, approached him, and in a few sensible words entreated and urged him to quit a life of such misery, lest he should end it there, which would be the greatest of all misfortunes. Cardenio was then in his right mind, free from any attack of that madness which so frequently carried him away, and seeing them dressed in a fashion so unusual among the frequenters of those wilds, could not help showing some surprise, especially when he heard them speak of his case as if it were a well-known matter, for the curate's words gave him to understand as much. So he replied to them thus: I see plainly, sirs, whoever you may be, that heaven, whose care it is to succor the good, and even the wicked very often, here in this remote spot, cut off from human intercourse, sends me, though I deserve it not, those who seek to draw me away from this to some better retreat, showing me by many and forcible arguments how unreasonably I act in leading the life I do. But as they know that if I escape from this evil I shall fall into another still greater, perhaps they will set me down as a weak-minded man, or, what is worse, one devoid of reason. Nor would it be any wonder, for I myself can perceive that the effect of the recollection of my misfortunes is so great, and works so powerfully to my ruin, that in spite of myself, I become at times like a stone, without feeling or consciousness, and I come to feel the truth of it when they tell me and show me proofs of the things I have done when the terrible fit overmasters me. And all I can do is bewail my lot in vain, and idly curse my destiny, and plead for my madness by telling how it was caused, to any that care to hear it, for no reasonable beings on learning the cause will wonder at the effects, and if they cannot help me, at least they will not blame me, and the repugnance they feel at my wild ways will turn into pity for my woes. If it be, sirs, that you are here with the same design as others have come with, before you proceed with your wise arguments, I entreat you to hear the story of my countless misfortunes, for perhaps, when you have heard it, you will spare yourselves the trouble you had taken offering consolation to grief that is beyond the reach of it. As they, both of them, desired nothing more than to hear from his own lips the cause of his suffering, they entreated him to tell it, promising not to do anything for his relief or comfort that he did not wish. Yes, hello, Simba. And thereupon the unhappy gentleman began his sad story in nearly the same words and manner in which he had related it to Don Quixote and the goatherd a few days before, when, through Master Elcebon and Don Quixote's scrupulous observance of what was due to chivalry, the tale was left unfinished, as his history has already recorded. But now, fortunately, the mad fit kept off, allowed him to tell it to the end, and so, coming to the incident of the note which Don Fernando had found in the volume of Amadis of Gaul, Cardenio said that he remembered it perfectly, and that it was in these words. Yeah, Simba really has gotten big. Little man was, when we started, he was, well, I guess he hadn't come around yet when we started, but he was itty-bitty baby. And then now, little man is, almost 15 pounds. Little man ain't so little anymore. Alright. Lucinda to Cardenio. Every day I discover merits in you that oblige and compel me to hold you in higher estimation. So if you desire to relieve me of this obligation without cost to my honor, you may easily do so. I have a father who knows you and loves me dearly, who, without putting any constraint on my inclination, will grant that what will be reasonable for you to have, if it be that you value me as you say, and as I believe you do. By this letter I was introduced, as I told you, to demand Lucinda for my wife, and it was through it that Lucinda came to be regarded by Don Fernando as one of the most discreet and prudent women of the day. And this letter it was that suggested his design of ruining me before mine could be carried into effect. I told Don Fernando that all Lucinda's father was waiting for was that mine should ask her of him, which I did not dare to suggest to him, fearing that he would not consent to do so, not because he did not know perfectly well the rank goodness, virtue, and beauty of Lucinda, and that she had qualities that would do honor to any family in Spain, but because I was aware that he did not wish me to marry so soon, before seeing what the Duke Ricardo would do for me. In short, I told him I did not venture to mention it to my father, as well on account of that difficulty as of many others that discouraged me, though I knew not well what they were, only that it seemed to me that what I desired was never to come to pass. To all this, Don Fernando answered that he would take it upon himself to speak to my father, and persuade him to speak to Lucinda's father. Oh, ambitious Marius! Oh, cruel Catiline! Oh, wicked Sylla! Oh, perfidious Ganelon! Oh, treacherous Velido! Oh, vindictive Julian! Oh, covetous Judas, traitor, cruel, vindictive, and perfidious! Wherein had this poor wretch failed in his fidelity, who with such frankness showed thee the secrets and the joys of his heart? What offence did I commit? What words did I utter, or what counsels did I give that had not the furtherance of thy honour and welfare for their aim? But woe is me! Wherefore do I complain? For sure it is, that when misfortunes spring from the stars, descending from on high, they fall upon us with such fury and violence, that no power on earth can check their course, nor human device stay their coming. Who could have thought that Don Fernando, a high-born gentleman, intelligent, bound to me by gratitude for my services, one that could win the object of his love wherever he might set his affections, could have become so obdurate, as they say, as to rob me of my one ewe lamb that was not even yet in my possession. But laying aside these useless and unavailing reflections, let us take up the broken thread of my unhappy story. To proceed, then, Don Fernando, finding my presence an obstacle to the execution of his treacherous and wicked design, resolved to send me to his elder brother, under the pretext of asking money from him to pay for 6 horses, which, purposely, and with the sole object of sending me away that he might the better carry out his infernal scheme, he had purchased the very day he offered to speak to my father, and the price of which he now desired me to fetch. Could I have anticipated this treachery? Could I by any chance have suspected it? Nay, so far from that, I offered with the greatest pleasure to go at once, in my satisfaction at the good bargain that had been made. Recklessly curious is a decent way to put it, Don Quixote. Recklessly curious and or just, perpetually lost in imagination. Oh, this one. This chapter is not so much recklessly curious. This one is the damnably trusting. This one is the man that trusted his friend's brother way, way too much. And also the return to the wilderness. Where were we? No, not Anselmo. This one is, what is the character here? Cardenio. Alright, where was I there? That night, I spoke with Lucinda, and told her what had been agreed upon with Don Fernando, and how I had strong hopes of our fair and reasonable wishes being realized. She, as unsuspicious as I was of the treachery of Don Fernando, bade me try to return speedily, as she believed the fulfillment of our desires would be delayed only so long as my father put off speaking to hers. I know not why it was that on saying this to me, her eyes filled with tears, and there came a lump in her throat that prevented her from uttering a word of many more that it seemed to me she was striving to say to me. I was astonished at this unusual turn, which I never before observed in her, for we always conversed, whenever good fortune and my ingenuity gave us the chance, with the greatest gaiety and cheerfulness, mingling tears, sighs, jealousies, doubts, or fears with our words. It was all on my part a eulogy of my good fortune, that heaven should have given her to me for my mistress. I glorified her beauty, I extolled her worth and her understanding, and she paid me back by praising in me what in her love for me she thought worthy of praise. And besides, we had 100,000 trifles and doings of our neighbors and acquaintances to talk about, and the utmost extent of my boldness was to take, almost by force, one of her fair white hands and carry it to my lips, as well as the closeness of the low grating that separated us allowed me. But the night before the unhappy day of my departure, she wept, she moaned she sighed, and she withdrew me, leaving me filled with perplexity and amazement, overwhelmed at the sight of such strange and affecting signs of grief and sorrow in Lucinda, but not to dash my hopes, as I ascribed it all to the depth of her love for me, and the pain that separation gives those who love tenderly. At last I took my departure, sad and dejected, my heart filled with fancies and suspicions, but not knowing well what it was I suspected or fancied, plain omens pointing to the sad event and misfortune that was awaiting me. I reached the place whither I had been sent, gave the letter to Don Fernando's brother, and was kindly received, but not promptly dismissed, for he desired me to wait, very much against my will, 8 days, in some place where the Duke his father was not likely to see me, as his brother wrote that the money was to be sent without his knowledge, all of which was a scheme of the treacherous Don Fernando, for his brother had no want of money to enable him to dispatch me at once. The command was one that exposed me to the temptation of disobeying it, as it seemed to me impossible to endure life for so many days separated from Lucinda, especially after leaving her in the sorrowful mood I have described to you. Nevertheless, as a dutiful servant, I obeyed, though I felt it would be at the cost of my well-being. But 4 days later there came a man in quest of me with a letter which he gave me, and which, by the address, I perceived to be from Lucinda, as the writing was hers. I opened it with fear and trepidation, persuaded that it must be something serious that had impelled her to write to me when at a distance, as she seldom did so when I was near. Before reading it, I asked the man who it was that had given it to him, and how long he had been upon the road. He told me that, as he happened to be passing through one of the streets of the city at the hour of noon, a very beautiful lady called to him from a window, and with tears in her eyes said to him hurriedly, "Brother, if you are, as you seem to be, a Christian, for the love of God I entreat you to have this letter dispatched without a moment's delay to the place and person named in the address, all which is well known, and by this you will render a great service to our Lord, and that you may be at no inconvenience in doing so, take what is in this handkerchief." And, said he, with this she threw me a handkerchief out of the window, in which were tied up 100 reals, and this gold ring which I bring here together with the letter I have given you. And then, without waiting for any answer, she left the window, though not before she saw me take the letter and the handkerchief, and I had by signs let her know that I would do as she bade me. And so, seeing myself so well paid for the trouble I would have in bringing it to you, and knowing by the address that it was to you it was sent, for, Signor, I know you very well, and also unable to resist that beautiful lady's tears, I resolved to trust no one, but to come myself and give it to you, and in 16 hours from the time when it was given me, I have made the journey, which, as you know, is 18 leagues. Damn, I made good time. All the while, the good-natured improvised courier was telling me this, I hung upon his words, my legs trembling under me, so that I could scarcely stand. However, I opened the letter and read these words: "The promise Don Fernando gave you to urge your father to speak to mine, he has fulfilled, much more to his own satisfaction than to your advantage. I have to tell you, Signor, that he has demanded me for a wife, and my father, led away by what he considers Don Fernando's superiority over you, has favored his suit so cordially that in 2 days hence the betrothal is to take place with such secrecy and so privately that the only witnesses are to be the heavens above and a few of the household. Picture to yourself the state I am in. Judge, if it be urgent for you to come, the issue of the affair will show you whether I love you or not. God grant this may come to your hand before mine shall be forced to link itself to his, with his who keeps so ill the faith that he has pledged." Such, in brief, were the words of the letter, words that made me set out at once without waiting any longer for reply or money, for I now saw clearly that it was not the purchase of horses, but of his own pleasure, that had made Don Fernando send me to his brother. The exasperation I felt against Don Fernando, joined with the fear of losing the prize I had won by so many years of love and devotion, lent me wings, so that almost flying, I reached home the same day. By the hour which served for speaking with Lucinda, I arrived unobserved, and left the mule on which I had come at the house of the worthy man who had brought me the letter, and fortune was pleased to be for once so kind that I found Lucinda at the grating that was the witness of our loves. She recognized me at once, and I her, but not as she ought to have recognized me, or I her. But who is there in the world that can boast of having fathomed or understood the wavering mind and unstable nature of a woman? Of a truth, no one. To proceed, as soon as Lucinda saw me, she said, "Cardenio, I am in my bridal dress, and the treacherous Don Fernando and my covetous father are waiting for me in the hall with the other witnesses, who shall be the witnesses of my death before they witness my betrothal. Be not distressed, my friend, but contrive to be present at this sacrifice. And if that cannot be prevented by my words, I have a dagger concealed, which will prevent more deliberate violence, putting an end to my life, and giving thee a first proof of the love I have borne and bear thee." I replied to her distractedly and hastily, in fear lest I should not have time to reply, "May thy words be verified by thy deeds, lady. And if thou hast a dagger to save thy honor, I have a sword to defend thee, or kill myself,
if fortune be against us." I think she could not have heard all these words, for I perceived that they called her away in haste, as the bridegroom was waiting. Now the night of my sorrow set in. The sun of my happiness went down. I felt my eyes bereft of sight, my mind of reason. I could not enter the house, nor was I capable of any movement, but reflecting how important it was that I should be present, and what might take place on the occasion, I nerved myself as best I could and went in, for I well knew all the entrances and outlets, and besides, with the confusion that in secret pervaded the house, no one took notice of me. So, without being seen, I found an opportunity of placing myself in the recess formed by a window of the hall itself, and concealed by the ends and borders of 2 tapestries, from between which I could, without being seen, see all that took place in the room. Who could describe the agitation of heart I suffered as I stood there, the thoughts that came to me, the reflections that passed through my mind? They were such as cannot be, nor were it well they should be told. Suffice it to say, that the bridegroom entered the hall in his usual dress, without ornament of any kind. As groomsman, he had with him a cousin of Lucinda's, and except the servants of the house, there was no one else in the chamber. Soon afterwards, Lucinda came out of an antechamber, attended by her mother and 2 of her damsels, arrayed and adorned as became her rank and beauty, and in full festival and ceremonial attire. My anxiety and distraction did not allow me to observe or notice particularly what she wore. I could only perceive the colours, which were crimson and white, and the glitter of the gems and jewels on her headdress and apparel, surpassed by the rare beauty of her lovely auburn hair that, vying with the precious stones and the light of the 4 torches that stood in the hall, shone with a brighter gleam than all. O memory, mortal foe of my peace! Why bring before me now the incomparable beauty of that adored enemy of mine? Were it not better, cruel memory, to remind me and recall what she did then, that stirred by a wrong so glaring I may seek, if not vengeance now, at least to rid myself of life? Be not weary, sirs, of listening to these digressions. My sorrow is not one of those that can or should be told tersely and briefly. To me, each incident seems to call for many words.
To this, the curate replied that not only were they not wary of listening to him, but that the details he mentioned interested them greatly, being of a kind by no means to be omitted, and deserving of the same attention as the main story. "Proceed, then," continued Cardenio. "All being assembled in the hall, the priest of the parish came in, and, as he took the pair by the hand to perform the requisite ceremony, at the words, 'Will you, Signora Lucinda, take Signor Don Fernando here present for your lawful husband, as the Holy Mother Church ordains?' I thrust my head and neck out from between the tapestries, and with eager ears and throbbing heart set myself to listen to Lucinda's answer, awaiting in her reply the sentence of death or the grant of life. Oh, that I had but dared at that moment to rush forward, crying aloud, 'Lucinda, Lucinda, have a care what thou dost! Remember what thou owest me, but think thee thou art mine, and canst not be another's. Reflect that thy utterance of yes, and the end of my life will come at the same instant. O treacherous Don Fernando, robber of my glory, death of my life! What seekest thou? Remember that thou canst not, as a Christian, attain the object of thy wishes, for Lucinda is my bride, and I am her husband. Fool that I am! Now that I am far away and out of danger, I say I should have done what I did not do. Now that I have allowed my precious treasure to be robbed from me, I curse the robber, on whom I might have taken vengeance had I as much heart for it as I have for bewailing my fate. In short, as I was then a coward and a fool, little wonder is it if I am now dying shame-stricken, remorseful, and mad. The priest stood waiting for the answer of Lucinda, who for a long time withheld it, and just as I thought she was taking out the dagger to save her honor, or struggling for words to make some declaration of the truth on my behalf,
heard her say, in a faint and feeble voice, "I will." Don Fernando said the same, and giving her the ring, they stood linked by a knot that could never be loosed. The bridegroom then approached to embrace his bride, and she, pressing her hand upon her heart, fell fainting in her mother's arms. It only remains now for me to tell you the state I was in when, in that consent that I heard, I saw all my hopes mocked. The words and promises of Lucinda proved falsehoods, and the recovery of the prize I had that instant lost rendered impossible forever. I stood stupefied, wholly abandoned, it seemed, by heaven, declared the enemy of the earth that bore me, the air refusing me breath for my sighs, the water moisture for my tears. It was only the fire that gathered strength, so that my whole frame glowed with rage and jealousy. They were all thrown into confusion by Lucinda's fainting, and as her mother was unlacing her to give her air, a sealed paper was discovered in her bosom, which Don Fernando seized at once and began to read by the light of one of the torches. As soon as he had read it, he seated himself in a chair, leaning his cheek on his hand in the attitude of one deep in thought, without taking any part in the efforts that were being made to recover his bride from her fainting fit. Seeing all the household in confusion, I ventured to come out regardless whether I were seen or not, and determined, if I were, to do some frenzied deed that would prove to all the world the righteous indignation of my breast in the punishment of the treacherous Don Fernando, and even in that of the fickle, fainting traitress. But my fate, doubtless reserving me for greater sorrows, if such there be, so ordered it, that just then I had enough to spare of that reason which has since been wanting to me, and so, without seeking to take vengeance on my greatest enemies, which might have been easily taken, as all thought of me was so far from their minds, I resolved to take it upon myself, and on myself to inflict the pain they deserved, perhaps with even greater severity than I should have dealt it out to them had I slain them then. For sudden pain is soon over, but that which is protracted by tortures is ever slaying without ending life. In a word, I quitted the house, and reached that of the man with whom I had left my mule, made him saddle it for me, mounted without bidding him farewell, and rode out of the city. Another lot, not daring to turn my head to look back upon it, and when I found myself alone in the open country, screened by the darkness of the night, and tempted by the stillness to give vent to my grief without apprehension or fear of being heard or seen, then I broke silence, and lifted up my voice in maledictions upon Lucinda and Don Fernando, as if I could thus avenge the wrong they had done me. I called her cruel, ungrateful, false, thankless, but above all, covetous, since the wealth of my enemy had blinded the eyes of her affection, and turned it from me to transfer it to one to whom fortune had been more generous and liberal. And yet, in the midst of this outburst of execration and upbraiding, I found excuses for her, saying it was no wonder that a young girl in the seclusion of her parents' house, trained and schooled to obey them always, should have been ready to yield to their wishes when they offered her for a husband a gentleman of such distinction, wealth, and noble birth, that if she had refused to accept him, she would have been thought out of her senses, or to have set her affection elsewhere, a suspicion injurious to her fair name and fame. But then again, I said, had she declared I was her husband, they would have seen that in choosing me, she had not chosen so ill, but that they might excuse her. For before Don Fernando had made his offer, they themselves could not have desired, if their desires had been ruled by reason, a more eligible husband for their daughter than I was. And she, before taking the last fatal step of giving her hand, might easily have said that I had already given her mine. For I should have come forward to support any assertion of hers to that effect. In short, I came to the conclusion that feeble love, little reflection, great ambition, and a craving for rank had made her forget the words with which she had deceived me, encouraged and supported by my firm hopes and honourable passion.
Dude just keeps going and going and going. Lordy.
Thus soliloquizing and agitated, I journeyed onward for the remainder of the night, and by daybreak I reached one of the passes of these mountains, among which I wandered for 3 days more without taking any path or road, until I came to some meadows lying on I know not which side of the mountains, and there I inquired of some herdsmen in what direction the most rugged part of the range lay. They told me that it was in this quarter, and I at once directed my course hither, intending to end my life here. But as I was making my way among these crags, my mule dropped dead through fatigue and hunger, or, as I think more likely, in order to have done with such a worthless burden as it bore in me. I was left on foot, worn out, famishing, without anyone to help me or any thought of seeking help. And so thus I lay stretched on the ground. How long I know not. After which I rose up free from hunger and found beside me some goatherds, who no doubt were the persons who had relieved me in my need, for they told me how they had found me, and how I had been uttering ravings that showed plainly I had lost my reason, and since then I am conscious that I am not always in full possession of it, but at times so deranged and crazed that I do 1,000 mad things, tearing my clothes, crying aloud in these solitudes, cursing my fate, and idly calling on the dear name of her who is my enemy, and only seeking to end my life in lamentation. And when I recover my senses, I find myself so exhausted and weary that I can scarcely move. Most commonly, my dwelling is the hollow of a cork tree, large enough to shelter this miserable body. The herdsmen and goatherds who frequent these mountains, moved by compassion, furnish me with food, leaving it by the wayside or on the rocks, where they think I may perhaps pass and find it. And so, even though I may be then out of my senses, the wants of nature teach me what is required to sustain me, and make me crave it and eager to take it. At other times, so they tell me, when they find me in a rational mood, I sally out upon the road, and though they would gladly give it me, I snatch food by force from the shepherds, bringing it from the village to their huts. Thus do pass the wretched life that remains to me, until it be heaven's will to bring it to a close, or so to order my memory that I no longer recollect the beauty and treachery of Lucinda, or the wrong done me by Don Fernando. For if it will do this without depriving me of life, I will turn my thoughts into some better channel. If not, I can only implore it to have full mercy on my soul, for in myself I feel no power or strength to release my body from this strait in which I have of my own accord chosen to place it. Such, sirs, is the dismal story of my misfortune. Say if it be one that can be told with less emotion than you have seen in me. And do not trouble yourselves with urging or pressing upon me what reason suggests is likely to serve for my relief, for it will avail me as much as the medicine prescribed by a wise physician avails the sick man who will not take it. I have no wish for health without Lucinda, and since it is her pleasure to be another's, when she is or should be mine, let it be mine to be a prey to misery when I might have enjoyed happiness. She, by her fickleness, strove to make my ruin irretrievable. I will strive to gratify her wishes by seeking destruction, and it will show generations to come that I alone was deprived of that of which all others in misfortune have superabundance. For to them the impossibility of being consoled is itself a consolation, while to me it is the cause of greater sorrows and sufferings. For I think that even in death there will not be an end of them. Here Cardenio brought to a close his long discourse and story, as full of misfortune as it was of love. But just as the curate was going to address some words of comfort to him, he was stopped by a voice that reached his ear, saying in melancholy tones what will be told in the fourth part of this narrative. For at this point, the wise and the sage and sagacious historian Cid Hamete Benengeli brought the third to a conclusion.
Well, I wasn't sure that we were going to be getting the second or the continued part of the story there. Considering that Don Quixote was so feckless as to have interrupted him when mere mention of Amadis of Gaul was brought up, that I thought that was going to be left hanging and dangling and just leave us wondering. But no, it was certainly brought to conclusion there. And it was something, that is for sure. I think the poor unfortunate soul in the wilderness may be a little bit overreacting, but also not entirely unjustified. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt this time. But let's continue and see what this fourth part in this story has to bring about. We haven't seen Don Quixote in a while, so he's probably going to show up just in time to muck things up, as is only proper. Alright, continuing now with chapter 28, which treats of the strange and delightful adventure that befell the curate and the barber in the same sierra. Happy and fortunate were the times when that most daring knight Don Quixote of La Mancha was sent into the world, for by reason of his having formed a resolution so honourable as that of seeking to revive and restore to the world the long-lost and almost defunct order of knight-errantry, we now enjoy in this age of ours, so poor in light entertainment, not only the charm of his veracious history, but also of the tales and episodes contained in it, which are, in a measure, no less pleasing, ingenious, and truthful than the history itself, which, resuming its thread, carded, spun, and wound, relates that just as the curate was going to offer consolation to Cardenio, he was interrupted by a voice that fell upon his ears, saying in plaintive tones, "O God, is it possible I have found a place that may serve as a secret grave for the weary load of this body that I support so unwillingly? If the solitude these mountains promise deceives me not, it is so. Ah, woe is me! How much more grateful to my mind will be the society of these rocks and brakes that permit me to complain of my misfortune to heaven than that of any human being. For there is none on earth to look to for counsel in doubt, comfort in sorrow, or relief in distress." All this was heard distinctly by the curate and those with him, and as it seemed to them to be uttered close by, as indeed it was, they got up to look for the speaker, and before they had gone 20 paces, they discovered behind a rock, seated at the foot of an ash tree, a youth in the dress of a peasant, whose face they were unable, at the moment, to see, as he was leaning forward, I guess that wasn't Don Quixote, bathing his feet in the brook that flowed past. They approached so silently that he did not perceive them, being fully occupied in bathing his feet, which were so fair that they looked like two pieces of shining crystal, brought forth among the other stones of the brook. The whiteness and beauty of these feet struck them with surprise, for they did not seem to have been made to crush clods or to follow the plough and the oxen as their owner's dress suggested. And so, finding they had not been noticed, the curate, who was in front, made a sign to the other two to conceal themselves behind some fragments of rock that lay there, which they did, observing closely what the youth was about. He had on a loose, double-skirted, dark brown jacket, bound tight to his body with a white cloth. He wore besides breeches and gaiters of brown cloth, and on his head a brown montera, and he had the gaiters turned up as far as the middle of the leg, which verily seemed to be of pure alabaster. As soon as he had done bathing his beautiful feet,
He wiped them with a towel he took from under the montera, on taking off which he raised his face, and those who were watching him had an opportunity of seeing a beauty so exquisite that Cardenio said to the curate in a whisper, "As this is not Lucinda, it is no human creature, but a divine being." The youth then took off the montera, and, shaking his head from side to side, there broke loose and spread out a mass of hair that the beams of the sun might have envied. By this they knew that what had seemed a peasant was a lovely woman, nay, the most beautiful the eyes of two of them had ever beheld, or even Cardenio's, if they had not seen and known Lucinda, for he afterwards declared that only the beauty of Lucinda could compare with this. The long auburn tresses not only covered her shoulders, but such was their length and abundance, concealed all around beneath their masses, that so that except the feet nothing of her form was visible. She now used her hands as a comb, and if her feet had seemed like bits of crystal in the water, her hands looked like pieces of driven snow among her locks, all which increased not only the admiration of the three beholders, but their anxiety to learn who she was. With this object they resolved to show themselves, and at the stir they made in getting upon their feet, the fair damsel raised her head, and parting her hair from before her eyes with both hands, she looked to see who had made the noise, and the instant she perceived them, she started to her feet, and without waiting to put on her shoes or gather up her hair, hastily snatched up a bundle as though of clothes that she had beside her, and, scared and alarmed, endeavored to take flight. But before she had gone 6 paces, she fell to the ground, her delicate feet being unable to bear the roughness of the stones. Seeing which, the three hastened towards her, and the curate, addressing her first, said, "Stay, Signora, whoever you may be. For those whom you see here only desire to be of service to you, and you have no need to attempt a flight so heedless, for neither can your feet bear it, nor we allow it." Taken by surprise and bewildered, she made no reply to these words. They, however, came towards her, and the curate, taking her hand, went on to say, "What your dress would hide, Signora, is made known to us by your hair, a clear proof that it can be no trifling cause that has disguised your beauty in a garb so unworthy of it, and sent it into solitudes like these where we have had the good fortune to find you, if not to relieve your distress, at least to offer you comfort, for no distress, so long as life lasts, can be so oppressive, or reach such a height as to make the sufferer refuse to listen to comfort offered with good intention. And so, Signora, or Signor, or whatever you prefer to be, dismiss the fears that our appearance has caused you, and make us acquainted with your good or evil fortunes. For from us, all of us together, or from each one of us, you will receive sympathy in your trouble." And the curate here is way ahead of his time, respecting pronouns of choice. While the curate was speaking, the disguised damsel stood as if spellbound, looking at them without opening her lips or uttering a word, just like a village rustic, to whom something strange that he has never seen before has been suddenly shown. But on the curate addressing some further words to the same effect to her, sighing deeply, she broke silence and said, "Since the solitude of these mountains has been unable to conceal me, and the escape of my disheveled tresses will not allow my tongue to deal in falsehoods, it would be idle for me now to make any further pretense of what, if you were to believe me, you would believe more out of courtesy than for any other reason. This being so, I say thank you, sirs, for the offer you have made me, which places me under the obligation of complying with the request you have made of me, though I fear the account I shall give you of my misfortunes will excite in you as much concern as compassion, for you will be unable to suggest anything to remedy them, or any consolation to alleviate them. However, that my honor may not be left a matter of doubt in your minds, now that you have discovered me to be a woman, and see that I am young, alone, and in this dress, things have taken together or separately would be enough to destroy any good name. I feel bound to tell what I would willingly keep secret if I could.
All this she, who was now seen to be a lovely woman, delivered without any hesitation, with so much ease, and in so sweet a voice, that they were not less charmed by her intelligence than by her beauty. And as they again repeated their offers and entreaties to her to fulfill her promise, she, without further pressing, first modestly covering her feet and gathering up her hair, seated herself on a stone with the three placed around her, and, after an effort to restrain some tears that came to her eyes, in a clear and steady voice, began her story thus.
In this Andalusia, there is a town from which a duke takes a title, which makes him one of those that are called the grandees of Spain. This nobleman has 2 sons, the elder heir to his dignity, and apparently to his good qualities, the younger heir to I know not what, unless it be the treachery of Valido, and the falsehood of Ganelon. My parents are this lord's vassals, lowly in origin, but so wealthy that if birth had conferred as much on them as fortune, they would have nothing left to desire, nor should I have had reason to fear trouble like that in which I find myself now. For it may be that my ill fortune came of theirs in not having been nobly born.
Hello, welcome in. I hope you enjoyed tonight's reading.
It is true that they are not so low that they have any reason to be ashamed of their condition, but neither are they so high as to remove from my mind the impression that my mishap comes of their humble birth. They are, in short, peasants, plain, homely people, without any taint of disreputable blood, and, as the saying is, old rusty Christians, but so rich that by their wealth and free-handed way of life, they are coming by degrees to be considered gentlefolk by birth, and even by position, though the wealth and nobility they thought most of was having me for their daughter. And as they have no other child to make their heir, and are affectionate parents, I was one of the most indulged daughters that ever parents indulged. I was the mirror in which they beheld themselves, the staff of their old age, and the object in which, with submission to heaven, all their wishes centered. And mine were in accordance with theirs, for I knew their worth, and as I was the mistress of their hearts, so was I also of their possessions. Through me they engaged or dismissed their servants. Through my hands passed the accounts and returns of what was sown and reaped, the oil mills, the wine presses, the count of the flocks and herds, the beehives, all, in short, that a rich farmer like my father has or can have, I had under my care. And I acted as steward and mistress with an assiduity on my part and satisfaction on theirs that I cannot well describe to you. The leisure hours left to me after I had given the requisite orders to the head shepherds, overseers, and other labourers, I passed in such employments as are not only allowable but necessary for young girls, those that the needle, embroidery, cushion, and spinning wheel usually afford. And if to refresh my mind I quitted them for a while, I found recreation in reading some devotional book or playing the harp, for experience taught me that music soothes the troubled mind and relieves weariness of spirit. Such was the life I led in my parents' house, and if I have depicted it thus minutely, it is not out of ostentation, or to let you know that I am rich, but that you may see how, without any fault of mine, I have fallen from the happy condition I have described to the misery I am in at present. The truth is, that while I was leading this busy life, in a retirement that might compare with that of a monastery, and unseen, as I thought, by any except the servants of the house, when I went to Mass it was so early in the morning, and I was so closely attended by my mother and the women of the household, and so thickly veiled and so shy, that my eyes scarcely saw more than ground that I trod on. In spite of all this, the eyes of love, or idleness, more properly speaking, that the lynxes cannot rival, discovered me, with the help of the assiduity of Don Fernando. But that is the name of the youngest son of the Duke I told of. Saw the twist coming. But, oof. Small world here. The moment the speaker mentioned the name of Don Fernando, Cardenio changed color and broke into a sweat, with such signs of emotion that the curate and the barber who observed it feared that one of the mad fits which they heard attacked him sometimes was coming upon him. But Cardenio showed no further agitation, and remained quiet, regarding the peasant girl with fixed attention, for he began to suspect who she was. She, however, without noticing the excitement of Cardenio, continuing her story, went on to say, and they had hardly discovered me when, as he owned afterwards, he was smitten with a violent love for me, as the manner in which it displayed itself plainly showed. But to shorten the long recital of my woes, I will pass over in silence all the artifices employed by Don Fernando for declaring his passion for me. He bribed all the household. He gave and offered gifts and presents to my parents. Every day was like a holiday or a merrymaking in our street. By night, no one could sleep for the music. The love letters that used to come to my hand, no one knew how, were innumerable, full of tender pleadings and pledges, containing more promises and oaths than there were letters in them. All which not only did not soften me, but hardened my heart against him, as if he had been my mortal enemy, and as if everything he did to make me yield were done with the obstinate intention. Not that the high-bred bearing of Don Fernando was disagreeable to me, or that I found his importunities wearisome, for it gave me a certain sort of satisfaction to find myself so sought and prized by a gentleman of such distinction, and I was not displeased at seeing my praises in his letters, for however ugly we women may be, it seems to me it always pleases us to hear ourselves called beautiful, but that my own sense of right was opposed to all this, as well as the repeated advice of my parents, who now very plainly perceived Don Fernando's purpose, for he cared very little if all the world knew it. They told me they trusted and confided their honor and good name to my virtue and rectitude alone, and bade me consider the disparity between Don Fernando and myself, from which I might conclude that his intentions, whatever he might say to the contrary, had for their aim his own pleasure rather than my advantage, and if I were at all desirous of opposing an obstacle to his unreasonable suit, they were ready, they said, to marry me at once to anyone I preferred, either among the leading people of our own town, or of any of those in the neighborhood, for with their wealth and my good name, a match might be looked for in any quarter. This offer, and their sound advice, strengthened my resolution. I never gave Don Fernando a word in reply that could hold out to him any hope of success, however remote. All this caution of mine, which he must have taken for coyness, had apparently the effect of increasing his wanton appetite, for that is the name I give to his passion for me. Had it been what he declared it to be, you would not know of it now, because there would have been no occasion to tell you of it. At length, he learned that my parents were contemplating marriage for me in order to put an end to his hopes of obtaining possession of me, or at least to secure additional protectors to watch over me. And this intelligence, or suspicion, made him act as you shall hear. One night, as I was in my chamber with no other companion than a damsel who waited on me, with the doors carefully locked, lest my honor should be imperiled through any carelessness, I know not, nor can conceive how it happened, but with all this seclusion, and these precautions, and in the solitude and silence of my retirement, I found him standing before me. A vision that so astounded me that it deprived my eyes of sight and my tongue of speech. I had no power to utter a cry, nor, I think, did he give me the time to utter one. As he immediately approached me, and, taking me in his arms, for overwhelmed as I was powerless, I say, to help myself, he began to make such professions to me that I know not how falsehood could have had the power of dressing them up to seem so like truth. And the traitor contrived that his tears should vouch for his words, and his sighs for his sincerity. I, a poor young creature alone, ill-versed among my people in cases such as this, began, I know not how, to think all these lying protestations true, though without being moved by his sighs and tears to anything more than pure compassion. And so, as the first feeling of bewilderment passed away, and I began in some degree to recover myself, I said to him with more courage than I thought I could have possessed, if, as I am now in your arms, Signor, I were in the claws of a fierce lion, and my deliverance could be procured by doing or saying anything to the prejudice of my honor, it would no more be in my power to do it or to say it, than it would be possible that what was should not have been. So then, if you hold my body clasped in your arms, I hold my soul secured by virtuous intentions, very different from yours, as you will see if you attempt to carry them into effect by force. I am your vassal, but I am not your slave. Your nobility neither has nor should have any right to dishonor or degrade my humble birth, and low-born peasant as I am, I have myself respect as much as you, a lord and gentleman. With me your violence will be to no purpose. Your wealth will have no weight, your words will have no power to deceive me, nor your sighs or tears to soften me. Were I to see any of the things I speak of in him whom my parents gave me as a husband, his will should be mine, and mine should be bounded by his, and my honor, being preserved, even though my inclinations were not, would willingly yield him what you, Signor, would now obtain by force. And this I say, lest you should suppose that any but my lawful husband shall ever win anything of me. If that, said this disloyal gentleman, be the only scruple you feel, fairest Dorothea, for that is the name of this unhappy being, see here I give you my hand to be yours, and let heaven, from which nothing is hid, and this image of Our Lady you have here, be witnesses of this pledge. He may, as you say, he may as well be speaking in semaphore, and unfortunately, it appears that Dorothea understands semaphore about as well as your average Arizonan. When Cardenio heard her say she was called Dorothea, he showed fresh agitation and felt convinced of the truth of his former suspicion, but he was unwilling to interrupt the story and wished to hear the end of what he already all but knew. So he merely said, "What? Is Dorothea your name, Signora? I have heard of another of the same name, who can perhaps match your misfortunes. But proceed. By and by, I may tell you something that will astonish you as much as it will excite your compassion." Dorothea was struck by Cardenio's words, as well as by his strange and miserable attire, and begged him, if he knew anything concerning her, to tell it to her at once, for if fortune had left her any blessing, it was courage, to bear whatever calamity might fall upon her, as she felt sure that none could reach her capable of increasing in any degree what she endured already. "I would not let the occasion pass, Signor," replied Cardenio, "of telling you what I think, if what I suspect were the truth. But so far there has been no opportunity, nor is it of any importance to you to know it." "Be it as it may," replied Dorothea, "what happened in my story was that Don Fernando, taking an image that stood in the chamber, placed it as a witness of our betrothal, and with the most binding words and extravagant oaths, gave me his promise to become my husband, though, before he had made an end of pledging himself, I bade him consider well what he was doing, and think of the anger his father would feel at seeing him married to a peasant girl and one of his vassals. I told him not to let my beauty, such as it was, blind him, but that was not enough to furnish an excuse for his transgression, and if, in the love he bore me, he wished to do me any kindness, it would be to leave my lot to follow its course at the level my condition required. For marriages so unequal never brought happiness, nor did they continue long to afford the enjoyment they began with." Lady seems to have a good head on her shoulders. All this that I have now repeated I said to him, and much more which I cannot recollect, but it had no effect in inducing him to forego his purpose. He, who has no intention of paying, does not trouble himself about difficulties when he is striking the bargain. At the same time, I argued the matter briefly in my own mind, saying to myself, I shall not be the first who has risen through marriage from a lowly to a lofty station, nor will Don Fernando be the first whom beauty, or, as is more likely, a blind attachment, has led to make himself below his rank. Then, since I am introducing no new usage or practice, I may as well avail myself of the honor that chance offers me. For even though his inclination for me should not outlast the attainment of his wishes, I shall be, after all, his wife, before God. And if I strive to repel him by scorn, I can see that fair means failing. He is in a mood to use force, and I shall be left dishonored, and without any means of proving my innocence to those who cannot know how innocently I have come to be in this position. For what arguments would persuade my parents that this gentleman entered my chambers without my consent?
Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, brother was trying to get him into my Netflix.
All these questions and answers passed through my mind in a moment, but the oaths of Don Fernando, the witnesses he appealed to, the tears he shed, and lastly the charms of his person and his high-bred grace, which, accompanied by such signs of genuine love, might well have conquered a heart even more free and coy than mine. These were the things that more than all began to influence me, and lead me unawares to my ruin. I called my waiting maid to me, that there might be a witness on earth besides those in heaven, and again Don Fernando renewed and repeated his oaths, invoked as witnesses fresh saints, in addition to the former ones, called down upon himself 1,000 curses hereafter should he fail to keep his promise, shed more tears, redoubled his sighs, and pressed me closer in his arms, from which he had never allowed me to escape. And so I was left by my maid, and ceased to be one, and he became a traitor and a perjured man. The day which followed the night of my misfortune did not come so quickly, I imagine, as Don Fernando wished. For when desire has attained its object, the greatest pleasure is to fly from the scene of pleasure. I say so because Don Fernando made all haste to leave me, and by the adroitness of my maid, who was indeed the one who had admitted him, gained the street before daybreak. But on taking leave of me, he told me, though not with as much earnestness and fervour as when he came, that I might rest assured of his faith, and of the sanctity and sincerity of his oaths, and to confirm his words he drew a rich ring off his finger, and placed it upon mine. He then took his departure, and I was left, I know not whether sorrowful or happy. All I can say is, I was left agitated and troubled in mind, and almost bewildered by what had taken place. And I had not the spirit, or else it did not occur to me, to chide my maid for the treachery she had been guilty of in concealing Don Fernando in my chamber. As yet I was unable to make up my mind whether what had befallen me was for good or evil. I told Don Fernando at parting that, as I was now his, he might see me on other nights in the same way, until it should be his pleasure to let the matter become known. But, except the following night, he came no more, nor for more than a month could I catch a glimpse of him in the street or in church, while I wearied myself with watching for one, although I knew he was in the town, and almost every day went out hunting, a pastime he was very fond of. I remember well how sad and dreary those days and hours were to me. I remember well how I began to doubt as they went by, and even to lose confidence in the faith of Don Fernando, and I remember, too, how my maid heard those words in reproof of her audacity that she had not heard before, and how, I was forced to put a constraint on my tears and on the expression of my countenance, not to give my parents cause to ask me why I was so melancholy, and to drive me to invent falsehoods in reply. But all this was suddenly brought to an end. For the time came when all such considerations were disregarded, and there was no further question of honor, when my patience gave way and the secret of my heart became known abroad. The reason was that a few days later it was reported in the town that Don Fernando had been married in a neighboring city to a maiden of rare beauty, the daughter of parents of distinguished position, though not so rich that her portion would entitle her to look for so brilliant a match. It was said, too, that her name was Lucinda, and that at the betrothal some strange things had happened. Cardenio heard the name of Lucinda, but he only shrugged his shoulders, bit his lips, bent his brows, and before long 2 streams of tears escaped from his eyes. Dorothea, however, did not interrupt her story, but went on in these words. This sad intelligence reached my ears, and instead of being struck with a chill, with such wrath and fury did my heart burn that I scarcely restrained myself from rushing out into the streets, crying aloud and proclaiming openly the perfidy and treachery of which I was the victim. But this transport of rage was, for the time, checked by a resolution I formed to be carried out the same night. Oh, hang on, we're dropping a few frames. Hang tight. Okay, I do believe the buffering is about through. Let me make sure my monitor will catch up. All right, there we are. All right. Yeah, sorry for the interruption there. I think we are back to live. Yep, not dropping frames. All right, let's get back into it. We'll take it from the top of that paragraph. This sad intelligence reached my ears, and instead of being struck with a chill, with such wrath and fury did my heart burn that I scarcely restrained myself from rushing out into the streets, crying aloud and proclaiming openly the perfidy and treachery of which I was the victim. But this transport of rage was, for the time, checked by a resolution I formed, to be carried out the same night, and that was to assume this dress, which I got from a servant of my father's, one of the Zegels, as they are called in farmhouses, to whom I confided the whole of my misfortune, and whom I entreated to accompany me to the city where I heard my enemy was. He, though he remonstrated with me for my boldness, and condemned my resolution, when he saw me bent upon my purpose, offered to bear me company, as he said, to the end of the world. I at once packed up a linen pillowcase, a woman's dress, and some jewels, and money to provide for emergencies, and, in the silence of the night, without letting my treacherous maid know, I sallied forth from the house, accompanied by my servant and abundant anxieties, and on foot set out for the city, but borne, as it were, upon wings by my eagerness to reach it. It will not prevent what I presumed to be already done, at least to call upon Don Fernando to tell me with what conscience he had done it. I reached my destination in 2 days and a half, and on entering the city inquired for the house of Lucinda's parents. The first person I asked gave me more in reply than I sought to know. He showed me the house, and told me all that had occurred at the betrothal of the daughter of the family, an affair of such notoriety in the city that it was the talk of every knot of idlers in the street. He said that on the night of Don Fernando's betrothal with Lucinda, as soon as she had consented to be his bride by saying yes, she was taken with a sudden fainting fit, and that on the bridegroom approaching to unlace the bosom of her dress to give her air, he found a paper in her own handwriting, in which she said and declared that she could not be Don Fernando's bride, because she was already Cardenio's, who, according to the man's account, was a gentleman of distinction of the same city, and that, if she had accepted Don Fernando, it was only in obedience to her parents. In short, he said, the words of the paper made it clear she meant to kill herself on the completion of the betrothal, and give her reasons for putting an end to herself, all which was confirmed, it was said, by a dagger they found somewhere in her clothes. On seeing this, Don Fernando, persuaded that Lucinda had befooled, slighted, and trifled with him, assailed her before she had recovered from her swoon, and tried to stab her with the dagger that had been found, and would have succeeded had not her parents and those who were present prevented him. It was said, moreover, that Don Fernando went away at once, and that Lucinda did not recover from her prostration until the next day, when she told her parents how she was really the bride of that Cardenio I have mentioned. I learned besides that Cardenio, according to report, had been present at the betrothal, and that upon seeing her betrothed contrary to his expectation, he had quitted the city in despair, leaving behind him a letter declaring the wrong Lucinda had done him, and his intention of going where no one should ever see him again. All this was a matter of notoriety in the city, and everyone spoke of it, especially when it became known that Lucinda was missing from her father's house, and from the city. She was not to be found anywhere, to the distraction of her parents, who knew not what steps to take to recover her. What I learned revived my hopes, and I was better pleased not to have found Don Fernando than to find him married, for it seemed to me that the door was not yet entirely shut upon relief in my case, and I thought that, perhaps, Heaven had put this impediment in the way of the second marriage, to lead him to recognize his obligations under the former one, and reflect that as a Christian he was bound to consider his soul above all human objects. All this passed through my mind, and I strove to comfort myself without comfort, indulging in faint and distant hopes of cherishing that life that I now abhor. But while I was in the city, uncertain what to do, as I could not find Don Fernando, I heard notice given by the public crier offering a great reward to anyone who should find me, and giving the particulars of my age and of the very dress I wore. And I heard it said that the lad who came with me had taken me away from my father's house, a thing that cut me to the heart, showing how low my good name had fallen, since it was not enough that I should lose it by my flight, but that they must add with whom I had fled, and that one so much beneath me and so unworthy of my consideration. The instant I heard the notice, I quitted the city with my servant, who now began to show signs of wavering in his fidelity to me. And the same night, for fear of discovery, we entered the most thickly wooded part of these mountains. But, as is commonly said, one evil calls up another, and in the end of one misfortune is apt to be the beginning of one still greater. And so it proved in my case, for my worthy servant, until then so faithful and trusty, when he found me in this lonely spot, proved more by his own villainy than by my beauty, sought to take advantage of the opportunity which these solitudes seemed to present him, and with little shame and less fear of God and respect for me, began to make overtures to me, and finding that I replied to the effrontery of his proposals with justly severe language, he laid aside the entreaties which he had employed at first, and began to use violence. But just Heaven, that seldom fails to watch over and aid good intentions, so aided mine, that with my slight strength, and with little exertion, I pushed him over a precipice, where I left him, whether dead or alive I know not, and then, with greater speed than seemed possible in my terror and fatigue, I made my way into the mountains, without any other thought or purpose, save that of hiding myself among them, and escaping my father and those dispatched in search of me by his orders. It is now, I know not how many months, since with this object I came here, where I met a herdsman, who engaged me as his servant at a place in the heart of this Sierra, and all this time I have been serving him as herd, striving to keep always afield to hide these locks, which have now unexpectedly betrayed me. But all my care and pains were unavailing, for my master made the discovery that I was not a man, and harbored the same base designs as my servant. And as fortune does not always supply a remedy in cases of difficulty, and I had no precipice or ravine at hand down which to fling the master and cure his passion, as I had in the servant's case, I thought it a lesser evil to leave him, and again conceal myself among these crags, than make trial of my strength in argument with him. So, as I say, once more I went into hiding, to seek for some place where I might with sighs and tears implore heaven to have pity on my misery, and grant me help and strength to escape from it. Or let me die among the solitudes, leaving no trace of an unhappy being who, by no fault of hers, has furnished matter for talk and scandal at home and abroad.
All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 28. Now, we've had 2 quite long chapters so far tonight. So, let's go ahead. I do want to get one more chapter in tonight, but first I do need to re-up my drink. The gin has unfortunately run dry. So, let's go ahead and take just a few minutes here. Stretch your legs, top up our drinks, wet your whistle, and we'll be back in just a little while to continue tonight's reading with chapter 29. All right, be back in just a bit. Thanks, guys. All right, we are back. Just a quick moment. I need to update this because, as I had previously lamented, we are out of tonic. And I am not so far gone as to switch to just martinis on a Tuesday. That's a little much for me. But I did find a very lovely double cream stout. Let me readjust the placement here. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna obscure that. But yeah, a Bell's double cream stout. It is quite nice. No. Martinis are for lunch for business bros. Alright, let's go ahead and get one more chapter in tonight. We might run a little over, just judging by the length of this next one. It's about another 11-page chapter or so. We're kind of in the thick of things here, though, and I would rather not leave this story untold. Because there have been so many things coming together, happenstances, coincidences, and we've got a bit of a convergence here on our hands. So let's see how they will resolve themselves here. Hopefully they resolve themselves in this chapter. I'd rather not be left hanging until Friday. So, continuing on with chapter 29, which treats of the droll device and method adopted to extricate our love-stricken knight from the severe penance he had imposed upon himself. Because remember, there are, at minimum, 3 sorrowful individuals in keeping themselves separated from humanity, separate from the world in this one little mountainside. So, let's see what the most ridiculous of the 3 is up to. Such, sirs, is the true story of my sad adventures. Judge for yourselves now whether the sighs and lamentations you heard and the tears that flowed from my eyes had not sufficient cause, even if I had indulged in them more freely. And if you consider the nature of my misfortune, you will see that consolation is idle, as there is no possible remedy for it. All I ask of you is, that you may easily and reasonably do, to show me where I may pass my life unharassed by the fear and dread of discovery by those who are in search of me. For though the great love my parents bear me makes me feel sure of being kindly received by them, so great is my feeling of shame at the mere thought that I cannot present myself before them as they expect, that I had rather banish myself from their sight forever than look them in the face with the reflection that they beheld mine stripped of that purity they had a right to expect in me. With these words, she became silent, and the color that overspread her face showed plainly the pain and shame she was suffering at heart. In theirs the listeners felt as much pity as wonder at her misfortunes. But as the curate was just about to offer her some consolation and advice, Cardenio forestalled him, saying, "So then, Signora, you are the fair Dorothea, the only daughter of the rich Clenardo?" Dorothea was astonished at hearing her father's name, and at the miserable appearance of him who mentioned it. For it has been already said how wretchedly clad Cardenio was. So she said to him, "And who may you be, brother, who seem to know my father's name so well? For so far, if I remember rightly, I have not mentioned it in the whole story of my misfortunes." "I am that unhappy being, Signora," replied Cardenio, "whom, as you have said, Lucinda declared to be her husband. I am the unfortunate Cardenio, whom the wrongdoing of him who has brought you to your present condition has reduced to the state you see me in,
bare, ragged, bereft of all human comfort, and what is worse, of reason, were I only possessed when heaven is pleased for some short space to restore it to me. I, Dorothea, am he who witnessed the wrong done by Don Fernando, and waited to hear the yes uttered by which Lucinda owned herself his betrothed. I am he who had not courage enough to see how her fainting fit ended, or what came of the paper that was found in her bosom, because my heart had not the fortitude to endure so many strokes of ill fortune at once. And so, losing patience, I quitted the house, and leaving a letter with my host, which I entreated him to place in Lucinda's hands, I betook myself to these solitudes, resolved to end here the life I hated as if it were my mortal enemy. But fate would not rid me of it, contenting itself with robbing me of my reason, perhaps to preserve me for the good fortune I have had in meeting you. For if that which you have just told us be true, as I believe it to be, it may be that heaven has yet in store for both of us a happier termination to our misfortunes than we look for. Because, seeing that Lucinda cannot marry Don Fernando, being mine, as she was herself so openly declared, and that Don Fernando cannot marry her, as he is yours, we may reasonably hope that heaven will restore to us what is ours, as it is still in existence, and not yet alienated or destroyed. And, as we have this consolation springing from no very visionary hope or wild fancy, I entreat you, Signora, to form new resolutions in your better mind, as I mean to do in mine, preparing yourself to look forward to happier fortunes. For I swear to you, by the faith of a gentleman and a Christian, not to desert you until I see you in possession of Don Fernando. And if I cannot by words induce him to recognize his obligation to you, in that case, to avail myself of the right which my rank as a gentleman gives me, and with just cause challenge him on account of the injury he has done you, not regarding my own wrongs, which I shall leave to heaven to avenge, while I on earth devote myself to yours. Cardenio's words completed the astonishment of Dorothea, and, not knowing how to return thanks for such an offer, she attempted to kiss his feet, but Cardenio would not permit it, and the licensate replied for both, commended the sound reasoning of Cardenio, and lastly begged, advised, and urged them to come with him to his village, where they might furnish themselves with what they needed, and take measures to discover Don Fernando, or restore Dorothea to her parents, or do what seemed to them most advisable. Cardenio and Dorothea thanked him, and accepted the kind offer he made them, and the barber, who had been listening to all attentively and in silence, on his part some kindly words also, and with no less goodwill than the curate offered his services in any way that might be of use to them. He also explained to them, in a few words, the object that had brought them there, and the strange nature of Don Quixote's madness, and how they were waiting for his squire, who had gone in search of him. Like the recollection of a dream, the quarrel he had had with Don Quixote came back to Cardenio's memory, and he described it to the others. But he was unable to say what the dispute was about. At this moment, they heard a shout, and recognized it as coming from Sancho Panza, who, not finding them where he had left them, was calling aloud to them. They went to meet him, and in answer to their inquiries about Don Quixote, he told them how he had found him, stripped to his shirt, lank, yellow, half dead with hunger, and sighing for his lady Dulcinea. And, although he had told him that she commanded him to quit that place and come to El Toboso, where she was expecting him, he had answered that he was determined not to appear in the presence of her beauty until he had done deeds to make him worthy of her favor. And if this went on, Sancho said, he ran the risk of not becoming an emperor as in duty bound, or even an archbishop, which was the least he could be, for which reason they ought to consider what was to be done to get him away from there. The licensate, in reply, told him not to be uneasy, for they would fetch him away in spite of himself. He then told Cardenio and Dorothea what they had proposed to do to cure Don Quixote, or at any rate take him home, upon which Dorothea said that she could play the distressed damsel better than the barber, especially as she had there the dress in which to do it to the life, and that they might trust to her in acting the part in every particular requisite for carrying out their scheme, for she had read a great many books of chivalry, and knew exactly the style in which afflicted damsels begged boons of knights errant.
In that case, said the curate, there is nothing more required than to set about it at once, for beyond a doubt, fortune is declaring itself in our favor, since it has so unexpectedly begun to open a door for your relief and smooth the way for us to our object.
Dorothea then took out of her pillowcase a complete petticoat of some rich stuff, and a green mantle of some other fine material, and a necklace and other ornaments out of a little box, and with these, in an instant, she so arrayed herself that she looked like a great and rich lady. All this and more, she said, she had taken from home in case of need, but that until then she had no occasion to make use of it. They were all highly delighted with her grace, air, and beauty, and declared Don Fernando to be a man of very little taste when he rejected such charms. But the one who admired her most was Sancho Panza, for it seemed to him, what indeed was true, that in all the days of his life he had never seen such a lovely creature. And he asked the curate with great eagerness who this beautiful lady was, and what she wanted in these out-of-the-way quarters.
This fair lady, brother Sancho, replied the curate, is no less a personage than the heiress in the direct male line of the great kingdom of Micomicon, who has come in search of your master to beg a boon of him, which is that he redress a wrong injury that a wicked giant has done her. And from the fame as a good knight which your master has acquired far and wide, this princess has come from Guinea to seek him.
A lucky seeking and a happy finding,
said Sancho Panza at this,
especially if my master has the good fortune to redress that injury, and right that wrong, and kill that son of a bitch of a giant your worship speaks of, as kill him he will if he meets him, unless, indeed, he happens to be a phantom, for a master has no power at all against phantoms. But one thing among others I would beg of you, Signor Licensate, which is that, to prevent my master taking a fancy to be an archbishop, for that is what I'm afraid of, your worship would recommend him to marry this princess at once, for in this way he will be disabled from taking archbishop's orders, and will easily come into his empire, and I to the end of my desires. I have been thinking over the matter carefully, and by what I can make out, I find it will not do for me that my master should become an archbishop, because I am no good for the church, as I am married, and for me now, having, as I have a wife and children, to set about obtaining dispensations to enable me to hold a place of profit under the church would be endless work. So that, Signor, it all turns on my master marrying this lady at once, for as yet I do not know her grace, and so I cannot call her by her name.
She is called the Princess Micomicona, said the curate, for as her kingdom is Micomicon, it is clear that must be her name.
There's no doubt of that, replied Sancho, for I have known many to take their name and title from the place where they were born and call themselves Pedro of Alcala, Juan of Ubeda, and Diego of Valladolid. And it may be that over there in Guinea queens have the same way of taking the names of their kingdoms.
So it may, said the curate, and as for your master's marrying, I will do all in my power towards it.
With which Sancho was as much pleased as the curate was amazed at his simplicity, and at seeing what a hold the absurdities of his master had taken of his fancy, for he had evidently persuaded himself that he was going to be an emperor. But by this time, Dorothea had seated herself upon the curate's mule, and the barber had fitted the oxtail beard to his face, and they now told Sancho to conduct them to where Don Quixote was, warning him not to say that he knew either the licensed or the barber, as his master's becoming an emperor entirely depended on his not recognizing them. Neither the curate nor Cardenio, however, thought fit to go with them. Cardenio, lest he should remind Don Quixote of the quarrel he had with him, and the curate, as there was no necessity for his presence just yet. So they allowed the others to go on before them, while they themselves followed slowly on foot. The curate did not forget to instruct Dorothea how to act, but she said they might make their minds easy, as everything would be done exactly as the books of chivalry required and described. Oh no! How long have I been muted? Oh no! Oh no! How long has that been? Well, that's unfortunate. Oh, you know what? I think I just blew my nose at the top of the top of the page. So, okay, we should be fine. I'll just take it back from the top of this page. They had gone about 3/4 of a league when they discovered Don Quixote in a wilderness of rocks, by this time clothed, but without his armor. And as soon as Dorothea saw him, and was told by Sancho that that was Don Quixote, she whipped her palfrey, the well-bearded barber following her, and on coming up to him, her squire sprang from his mule, and came forward to receive her in his arms. And she, dismounting with great ease of manner, advanced to kneel before the feet of Don Quixote. And though he strove to raise her up, she, without rising, addressed him in this fashion. From this spot I will not rise, valiant and doughty knight, until your goodness and courtesy grant me a boon, which will redound to the honour and renown of your person, and render a service to the most disconsolate and afflicted damsel the sun has seen. And if the might of your strong arm corresponds to the repute of your immortal fame, you are bound to aid the helpless being who, led by the savour of your renowned name, hath come from far distant lands to seek your aid in her misfortunes.
I will not answer a word, beauteous lady, replied Don Quixote, nor will I listen to anything further concerning you, until you rise from the earth.
I will not rise, signor, answered the afflicted damsel, unless of your courtesy the boon I ask is first granted me.
I grant and accord it, said Don Quixote, provided, without detriment or prejudice to my king, my country, or her who holds the key of my heart and freedom, it may be complied with.
"It will not be to the detriment or prejudice of any of them, my worthy lord," said the afflicted damsel. And here Sancho Panza drew close to his master's ear, and said to him very softly,
"Your worship may very safely grant the boon she asks. It's nothing at all, only to kill a big giant, and she who asks it is the exalted Princess Micomicona, Queen of the great kingdom of Micomicon of Ethiopia."
All right, Sancho. You didn't have the story for more than 5 minutes and somehow bungled it. Well done. Well done.
"Let her be who she may, replied Don Quixote. "I will do what is my bounden duty, and what my conscience bids me, in conformity with what I have professed." And turning to the damsel, he said, "Let your great beauty rise, for I grant the boon which you would ask of me."
"Then what I ask," said the damsel, "is that your magnanimous person accompany me at once, whither I will conduct you, and that you promise not to engage in any other adventure or quest until you have avenged me of a traitor, who, against all human and divine law, has usurped my kingdom."
"I repeat that I grant it," replied Don Quixote, "and so, lady, you may from this day forth lay aside the melancholy that distresses you, and let your falling hopes gather new life and strength. For with the help of God and of my arm, you will soon see yourself restored to your kingdom, and seated upon the throne of your ancient and mighty realm, notwithstanding and despite of the felons who would gainsay it. And now, hands to the work, for in delay there is apt to be danger."
The distressed damsel strove with much pertinacity to kiss his hands, but Don Quixote, who was in all things a polished and courteous knight, would by no means allow it, but made her rise and embraced her with great courtesy and politeness, and ordered Sancho to look to Rocinante's girths, and to arm him without a moment's delay. Sancho took down the armor, which was hung up on a tree like a trophy, and having seen to the girths, armed his master in a trice, who, as soon as he found himself in his armor, exclaimed, "Let us be gone, in the name of God, to bring aid to this great lady." The barber was all this time on his knees, at great pains to hide his laughter, and not let his beard fall, for had it fallen, maybe their fine scheme would have come to nothing. But now, seeing the boon granted, and the promptitude with which Don Quixote prepared to set out in compliance with it, he rose and took his lady's hand, and between them they placed her upon the mule. Don Quixote then mounted Rocinante, and the barber settled himself on his beast, Sancho being left to go on foot, which made him feel anew the loss of his depth, finding the want of him now, but he bore all with cheerfulness, being persuaded that his master had now fairly started, and was just on the point of becoming an emperor. For he felt no doubt at all that he would marry this princess and be king of Micomicon, at least. The only thing that troubled him was the reflection that this kingdom was in the land of the blacks. That's a better translation than we've seen, a better turn of phrase than we've seen in many authors, so you know what, I'll take it. And that the people they would give him for vassals would be all black. But for this, he soon found a remedy in his fancy, and said he to himself,
"What is it to me if my vassals are blacks? What more have I to do than make a..."
Never mind. There goes any goodwill I had. Cervantes, come on, my man. Nope. It could have been worse, and it's getting worse.
"What more have I to do than make a cargo of them and carry them to Spain, where I can sell them and get ready money for them, and with it buy some title or some office in which to live at ease all the days of my life? Not unless you go to sleep and haven't the wit or skill to turn things to account and sell 3, 6, or 10,000 vassals while you would be talking about it. By God, I will stir them up, big and little, or as best I can, and let them be ever so black I'll turn them in white or yellow. Come, what a fool I am."
Fool indeed. Sancho, my man, You were so close to being free and clear, but no. That oh, I can't. Almost. We almost made it away without being. Yeah. The times and all. Different time, separate author from art. This is how things were. We can look on Sancho as a buffoon. I'll drink to that. And so he jogged on, so occupied with his thoughts and easy in his mind that he forgot all about the hardship of traveling on foot. Cardenio and the curate were watching all this from among some bushes, not knowing how to join company with the others. But the curate, who was very fertile in devices, soon hit upon a way of effecting their purpose, and with a pair of scissors he had in Casey, quickly cut off Cardenio's beard, and putting on him a grey jerkin of his own, he gave him a black cloak, leaving himself in his breeches and doublet, while Cardenio's appearance was so different from what it had been that he would not have known himself had he seen himself in a mirror. Having effected this, although the others had gone on ahead while they were disguising themselves, they easily came out on the high road before them, for the brambles and awkward places they encountered did not allow those on horseback to go as fast as those on foot. They then posted themselves on the level ground at the outlet of the Sierra, and as soon as Don Quixote and his companions emerged from it, the curate began to examine him very deliberately, as though he were striving to recognize him, and, after having stared at him for some time, he hastened towards him, with open arms, exclaiming, "A happy meeting with the mirror of chivalry, my worthy compatriot Don Quixote of La Mancha, the flower and cream of high breeding, the protection and relief of the distressed, the quintessence of knights errant." And so saying, he clasped in his arms the knee of Don Quixote's left leg. Yes, he, astonished at the stranger's words and behavior, looked at him attentively, and at length recognized him, very much surprised to see him there, and made great efforts to dismount. This, however, the curate would not allow, on which Don Quixote said, "Permit me, Signor Licensate, for it is not fitting that I should be on horseback, and so reverend a person as your worship on foot." "On no account will I allow it," said the curate. "Your mightiness must remain on horseback, for it is on horseback you achieve the greatest deeds and adventures that have been beheld in our age. As for me, an unworthy priest, it will serve me well enough to mount on the haunches of one of the mules of these gentlefolk, who accompany your worship, if they have no objection, and I will fancy I am mounted on the steed Pegasus, or on the zebra or charger that bore the famous Moor Muzarak, who, to this day, lies enchanted in the great hill of Zulema, a little distance from the great Complutum." Alright, dropping some frames. Hang on. A little bit of problem with connection. Hang on tight. Looks like it's coming back pretty quickly, though. Just making sure that it stays stable. Alright, I think we're okay. Yeah, looks good to me. "Nor even that will I consent to, Signor Licensate," answered Don Quixote, "and I know it will be the good pleasure of my lady the princess, out of love for me, to order her squire to give up the saddle of his mule to your worship, and he can sit behind if the beast will bear it." "It will, I am sure," said the princess, "and I am sure, too, that I need not order my squire, for he is too courteous and considerate to allow a churchman to go on foot when he might be mounted." "That he is," said the barber, and at once alighting, he offered his saddle to the curate, who accepted it without much entreaty. But unfortunately, as the barber was mounting behind, the mule being, as it happened, a hired one, which is the same thing as saying ill-conditioned, lifted its hind hooves to let fly a couple of kicks in the air, which would have made Master Nicholas wish his expedition in quest of Don Quixote at the devil had they caught him on the breast or head. As it was, they so took him by surprise that he came to the ground, giving so little heed to his beard that it fell off, and all he could do when he found himself without it was to cover his face hastily with both his hands and moan that his teeth were knocked out. Don Quixote, when he saw all that bundle of beard detached without jaws or blood from the face of the fallen squire, exclaimed, "By the living God! But this is a great miracle! It has knocked off and plucked away the beard from his face, as if it has been shaved off designedly." And dropping more frames. Hang on. We are almost done for the night. We a few more pages. A few pages. As long as YouTube and Twitch will allow us. We just need to get through a little bit more. Hang tight. Hang tight. And still, the frames, they drop. Good gracious. Yep. Buffering. Always with the buffering. Hang on. Alright, I think we're about done dropping. Just need to let the buffering catch up. Perhaps. Hopefully. Alright, I think we are back. Alright. Fantastic. Alright, so, where were we? I'll just take it back from the last line, because I think that was broken up too much. "By the living God! But this is a great miracle. It has knocked off and plucked away the beard from his face, as if it had been shaved off designedly." The curate, seeing the danger of discovery that threatened his scheme, at once pounced upon the beard and hastened with it to where Master Nicholas lay, still uttering moans, and drawing his head to his breast had it on in an instant, muttering over him some words which he said were a special charm for sticking on beards, as they would see, and as soon as he had it fixed, he left him, and the squire appeared well bearded and whole as before. Whereat Don Quixote was beyond measure astonished, and begged the curate to teach him that charm when he had an opportunity, as he was persuaded its virtue must extend beyond the sticking on of beards, for it was clear that where the beard had been stripped off, the flesh must have remained torn and lacerated, and when it could heal all that, it must be good for more than beards.
"And so it is,"
said the curate, and he promised to teach it to him on the first opportunity. They then agreed that, for the present, the curate should mount, and that the three should ride by turns until they reached the inn, which might be about 6 leagues from where they were. 3 then being mounted, that is to say, Don Quixote, the princess, and the curate, and 3 on foot, Cardenio, the barber, and Sancho Panza, Don Quixote said to the damsel, "Let your highness, lady, lead on whithersoever is most pleasing to you." But before she could answer, the licence said, "Towards what kingdom would your ladyship direct our course?" Is it perchance towards that of Micomicon? It must be, or else I know little about kingdoms. She, being ready on all points, understood that she was to answer yes. So she said, "Yes, Signor, my way lies toward that kingdom." "In that case," said the curate, "we must pass through my village, and there your worship will take the road to Cartagena, where you will be able to embark, fortune favoring, and if the wind be fair and the sea smooth and tranquil, in somewhat less than 9 years you may come in sight of the great Maona, Meotides, which is little more than 100 days' journey this side of your highness's kingdom." "Your worship is mistaken, Signor," said she, "for it is not 2 years since I set out from it, and though I never had good weather, nevertheless I am here to behold what I so longed for, and that is my Lord Don Quixote of La Mancha, whose fame came to my ears as soon as I set foot in Spain, and impelled me to go in search of him, to commend myself to his courtesy, and entreat the justice of my cause to the might of his invincible arm." "Enough! No more praise," said Don Quixote at this, "for I hate all flattery, and though this may not be so, still language of the kind is offensive to my chaste ears. I will only say, Signora, that whether it has might or not, that which it may or may not have shall soon be devoted to your service even unto death. And now, leaving this to its proper season, I would ask the Signor Licensate to tell me what it is that has brought him into these parts, alone, unattended, and so lightly clad that I am filled with amazement." "I will answer that briefly," replied the curate. "You must know then, Signor Don Quixote, that Master Nicholas, our friend and barber, and I were going to Seville to receive some money that a relative of mine who went to the Indies many years ago had sent me, and not such a small sum, but that it was over 60,000 pieces of 8, full weight, which is something. And, passing by this place yesterday, we were attacked by 4 footpads, who stripped us even to our beards. And then they stripped off, so that the barber found it necessary to put on a false one. And even this young man here," pointing to Cardenio, "they completely transformed. But the best of it is, the story goes on, in the neighborhood, that those who attacked us belong to a number of galley slaves, who, they say, were set free, almost on the very same spot, by a man of such valor that, in spite of the commissary and of the guards, he released the whole of them, and beyond all doubt, he must have been out of his senses, or he must be as great a scoundrel as they, or some man without heart or conscience, to let the wolf loose among the sheep, the fox among the hens, the fly among the honey. He has defrauded justice, and opposed his king and lawful master, for he opposed his just commands. He has, I say, robbed the galleys of their feet, stirred up the holy brotherhood, which for many years past has been quiet, and, lastly, has done a deed by which his soul may be lost, without any gain to his body." Sancho had told the curate and the barber of the adventure of the galley slaves, which, so much to his glory, his master had achieved, and hence the curate, in alluding to it, made the most of it to see what would be said or done by Don Quixote, who changed color at every word, not daring to say that it was he who had been the liberator of those worthy people. "These, then," said the curate, "were they who robbed us, and God in his mercy pardon him, who would not let them go to the punishment they deserved." The old priest is just letting him have it. That is, whoo, he's got a bit of a mean streak in him, doesn't he? Whoo.
Alright, guys, that brings us to the end of chapter 29, and the exit from the Sierra. We've now reunited Sancho with Don Quixote, and with a few hangers-on. Their party has grown from 2 to now there are 6 of them. So, we'll be back. We'll call this an end for tonight. And we'll be back on our next scheduled reading, which will be on Friday evening, starting at 8 o'clock Eastern, as always. Well, I can't say as always anymore, but for our normal schedule, where we will continue from chapter 30 next time, where we'll see what sort of adventures and how Don Quixote is going to manage to muck all this up again. Because now that he's on his way home, I'm sure things will go very, very poorly. Because, don't they always? All right. So, a reminder, for those of us who are joining us for the first time, maybe, or just have not heard all the goings-on, we are, on each of our scheduled nights, live on Twitch and YouTube both. All of our readings, almost all of our readings, are available in the VODs on YouTube. So if you feel that you need to catch up, or that you've missed something, or want to hear more of Don Quixote's adventures, or any of the other wonderful books that we've read in the past, YouTube is the place for it. If you're joining us on Twitch, you can look forward to unarchived readings. Well, they'll also be streamed on YouTube. But from now on Saturdays, we will be streaming more modern readings, starting from an earlier hour at 6 o'clock instead of 8. This week, we are starting The Fellowship of the Ring, bringing up a little bit of Tolkien. So if we've got some knights in the imagination here with Don Quixote, we've got some actual gallantry going on with some fantasy from the mind of Tolkien. A different sort of imagination, one might say. All right. As always, thank you very much for joining us. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to drop a like on the stream if you're on YouTube, maybe a subscription to the channel. Let the algorithm know that we're doing some fun things and direct people our way. If you're over on Twitch, a follow would not be remiss. So you can keep track of all of our misadventures and readings, and we generally keep to our schedule, so you can find us at our usual time and place. All right, with all that, I hope you have a wonderful evening, and until next time, good night. Hmm.